What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Poland Pro backpack blower, and the problem is I just bought it off of Craigslist and I don't know if it runs. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this blower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. So I saw an ad on Craigslist for some blowers, and this is one of them. It was pretty obvious from the picture that the pull rope has a problem, but we also need to look for the less obvious problems too. Now this one only has a 30cc engine and is rated at 485 CFM, so I would consider this blower on the low end when it comes to performance. Also, the reviews for this model aren't very good, but for only $10, it's worth that in just parts alone. Now before I start stripping this thing for valuable parts to sell online, I want to see if I can get it going again. Normally I would check to see if the engine is worn out by pulling on the rope, but since it's not retracting, we now need to remove the recoil and check to see what the problem is. However, we don't want to spend time and money on fixing the recoil only to find out that the engine is broken and won't start. Now with the recoil off the engine, we can still start the engine by using a drill to turn the engine over. If it runs for a bit, then we know we have spark and compression. However, if it doesn't run, then we'll need to test for both. So these are the starter pawls, and they engage the recoil pulley. If you press on them, they should spring towards the center, and if they don't spring back into position, then you'll need to inspect the springs under them, as they might be broken or the anchor end has come loose. Fortunately, these pawls are working just fine. Now there's a fair amount of rust on the pawl assembly, which means this blower has been sitting uncovered outside for a long time. That might give us a hint as to what's wrong with the recoil. So it didn't start, but I don't think we got enough fuel into the carburetor's throat. This time I'm going to try it again, but I'm going to put fuel in the spark plug hole instead. This time it started and ran for a second, so that means that the ignition system is working, and we also have enough compression for the engine to run. That also means if we put time and money into fixing the recoil, we should have a running backpack blower for just a few dollars and a couple of hours of work. Just for fun, I want to put some fuel into the tank, prime the fuel system, and see if we can get it started and working by itself. If it runs, then we'll save a lot of time not having to go through the carburetor. And unfortunately, the primer bulb just broke, so I don't think the carburetor is going to work. I'm going to try and get it to prime itself by test starting it again. If it doesn't start, then we'll need to inspect the carburetor for other problems. So it ran for a couple of seconds, but unfortunately it didn't stay running. I'll look at the carburetor later after I look at the recoil. I noticed that the rope has some orange staining on it, which is probably from the rust from the recoil assembly. You can also see the staining here on part of the recoil. I've never seen it mark off like this before, so it must have been retaining a lot of water after each rain. Next, I'll remove the screws in the middle and take the whole thing apart and see what the problem is. As far as I can tell, this part is a spring assist to make starting the engine a lot easier. The only problem is that the spring assist doesn't allow you to feel how worn out the engine is. So here's the recoil pulley, and besides a bit of staining, there doesn't seem to be any issues with it. If you look on the back side where it engages the spring, it also seems to be intact, so most likely the problem is the spring. Now the spring is retained in a metal cup, and the part that engages the pulley is near the center against this orange post. The other end of the spring is anchored here, and the most likely issue is the spring is broken, so we'll need to remove the spring and its cup. I would highly suggest wearing safety glasses when you're dealing with the spring. Now the spring looks fine, however, if I wind the spring up with some needle nose pliers, we should be able to see a break. And if you look here, you can see the broken end, and that's why this spring isn't able to retract the rope. I don't know of a safe way to repair the spring, so that means we'll need to carefully remove the bad spring and replace it. So here is a package of 5 springs, and although I couldn't tell what it was when I opened the bag. Now what's happened is that 2 of the pre-wound springs have come loose, and that's why it looks like this. The sad part is the plastic wrap and steel wire should have kept it mostly in shape. That means that this thing was wrapped up after the 2 springs had already come loose. So here's the spring out of the plastic wrap, and as you can see, there's a size difference. I didn't measure the length, but there must be over 10 feet of steel in each coil. The first thing we need to do is remove the old spring and then wind up the loose spring. Now you can anchor one end of the spring and then use pliers to wind the inner part. Now doing it this way may require you to have someone help you because as the windings get tighter, this spring wants to spring up into a ball. Another way to wind the spring is by hand, but your hands will get very sore near the end of this, and you still might need a second person to help you once it gets to the correct size. So here's the spring, and for handling purposes, I put the yellow retaining band back on it. It took me a couple of tries to get it to this point, and I have to admit it, I wanted to use one of the other springs that hadn't come loose because it takes a lot of work to get it to this point. Now first, make sure the spring is in the correct direction, then drop it into the cup and very carefully remove the yellow band. Once it's in the cup, I'll spray some lubricant on the spring and then I'll install it back into place. Now this is the dangerous part. The spring faces down, so when you install it, you have to be very careful. If you're not careful, the spring will pop out and you'll have a huge headache on your hands. Now once it's in, rotate the spring so that the anchor fits in a seat, and then make sure the other end of the spring is touching the orange center post. Then install the pulley, and out of habit, work the rope into a notch into the pulley. After that, install the spring assist and the washer and screw to hold everything in place. Another reason why the recoil might not be working to retract the rope is that the spring is so badly corroded that while being wound, the spring will bind up on itself. Obviously, the fix is to replace the spring. Now, if you have to keep a blower outside, I would suggest covering up the engine loosely so that if it does get a little bit wet, it can get enough air for it to dry up. So it's now time to rewind the spring. I'll start by making 4 turns, then I'll see if all the rope is pulled into the cover. If not, I'll add another turn. I don't think the rust is going to hurt the rope, but if you're concerned about it, this would be a great time to remove the pulley and replace the rope. After a few test pulls, it is retracting all the rope. Now, if you overwind the spring, it will be tough to pull the rope and the spring might bind up as well. Next, we'll install the recoil assembly back on the engine and check that it works to turn over the engine. Now, when installing the assembly back on the engine, make sure that you pull on the rope a few times to help get it seated. Otherwise, you might damage something if you install the screws without it properly seated against the pawls. Now once it's back on the engine, slowly pull the rope and check that it's working like it's supposed to, which it is. Now that we finally got the biggest problem fixed, the next step is to go through the carburetor. However, that will be in the next installment. So how much time and money have I spent on this repair? Well, the spring was a pack of 5, and for just one of them was only $2.60. The repair would have taken a lot less time if I didn't have to rewind the spring, but it was about 1.5 hours. Now there's still more to do. We probably have to replace the fuel lines and the broken primer bulb. The carburetor might also have to be serviced as well. So my question is, would you consider buying this used blower for $10, or is that still too much to pay for it? Or would you rather put that money to a new or used popular brand like Stihl, Echo, or Husqvarna? Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.